Right, so the sermon this morning is taken from a text entitled The Poem of the Man God. It's written by Maria Valtorta, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Maria Valtorta, was actually a Catholic nun. She lived in Italy, and she actually it was during most of the Second World War. She was bedridden because she had been injured, and she received visions directly from Jesus that was describing the day-to-day life that he had. And she dictated these visions to the priest that she worked with, and it was all kind of contained under the Catholic Church. There's some stuff in here that feels like it's been changed by the Catholic Church, but a lot of it is really, really good and represents a great teaching tool. So I'm going to read a passage for you where Jesus is speaking. You'll be familiar with this from the Gospel. Jesus says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Look, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. Because whoever asks will receive. Whoever looks will find. And it will be opened to whomsoever knocks. When your child stretches his little hand towards you, saying, 'Father, I am hungry,' do you perhaps give him a stone? Will you give him a snake if he asks for a fish? No, you will give him bread and fish and caresses and blessings over and above, because it is pleasant for a father to nourish his son and see his happy smiles. If therefore you, whose hearts are imperfect, are capable of giving gifts to your children out of a natural love that is common, how much more will your Father who is in heaven grant to those who ask him for the good and necessary things for their welfare? Do not be afraid to ask, and do not be afraid to receive. However, I wish to warn you against an easy error. Do not behave like those who are weak in their faith and in their love. Also amongst the believers there are pagans whose poor religion is a mixture of superstition and faith, a building tempered with, into which all kinds of parasitic herbs have penetrated, so much so that it falls to pieces, and they, weak and pagans as they are, feel their faith is dying if they are not heard. You ask, and you think it is fair to ask, and for that particular moment a certain grace may be right. But life does not end at that moment, and what is good today may not be good tomorrow. You do not know that because you only know the present, and that is a grace of God too. But God also knows the future. And God, to save you a greater pain, may not hear your prayer. During my year of public life, more than once I heard hearts moaning, 'How much I have suffered then,' when God did not hear me. But I say, it was better thus, because that grace would have prevented me from reaching this hour of God. I heard others say to me, 'Why, Lord, do you not hear me? You grant it to everybody, but not to me.' And yet, although I was sorry to hear them suffer, I had to say I cannot, because to hear them would have meant hindering their flight to a perfect life. Also the Father sometimes says, 'I cannot,' not because he cannot satisfy the request immediately, but because he does not want to satisfy it in view of future consequences. Listen, a child is suffering from intestinal trouble. His mother calls a doctor, and the doctor says he must fast to be cured. The child cries, yells, implores, seems to be languishing. The mother, always pitiful, joins her moaning to her son's. She thinks that the doctor's order is severe. She feels that such fasting and crying may be detrimental to her son. But the doctor is inflexible. At last he says, 'Woman, I know, you don't. Do you want to lose your son, or do you want to save him?' The mother shouts, 'I want him to live.' 'In that case,' says the doctor, 'I cannot let him have any food. It would kill him.' Also, the father sometimes says so. You pitiful mothers of your own ego do not want to hear it. Weep because some grace has been denied. But God says, 'I cannot. It would do you harm.' The day will come, or eternity will come, when you will say, 'Thank you, my God, for not listening to my foolishness.' What I said with regard to prayers, I say with regard to fasting. When you fast, do not look sad as hypocrites do, who on purpose disfigure their faces, that the world may know and believe that they are fasting, even if it is not true. They also have received their reward with the praise of the world, but will not receive another one. Instead, when you fast, look happy. Wash your faces thoroughly so that you may look fresh and smooth. Put oil on your heads and scents on your hair, and smile like one who has been well fed. Oh, truly there is no food that nourishes as much as love does. And who fasts with a loving spirit feeds on love. I solemnly tell you that even if the world calls you vain, the Father will see your heroic secret and will give you a double reward. One for your fasting and the other for the sacrifice of not being praised for it. So this passage, the beginning of the passage, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and the door shall be opened. It's the essence of how prayer works. But it's not just ask, and you shall receive. There are other steps to it. And in fact, it is a relatively advanced skill to learn how to pray and how to manifest those prayers that you want. In some of the courses here, in the Level 2 course, I encourage people to begin praying. And a certain percentage of people have a resistance to that because of their upbringing in certain churches. Maybe they were criticized because they didn't pray properly, or they wanted something for themselves and the minister said, oh, that's not appropriate, or the way that people prayed in the church seemed so stiff and so unnatural. So let's not condemn God for the errors of human beings. We come to a place like this, and I want you to think of it as a graduate program for spirituality. And spirituality is the pursuit of love and the connection to God. So really our prayers, in order to be totally aligned, should somehow fit under that category. That what we are praying for, and it's okay to pray for the things that you want, but if the things that you want take you away from love or away from God, then you may experience God saying, no, I cannot grant that. Now at some point, if you are fierce in your desire for something, to a certain degree, the laws of the universe are such that you can manifest it, even if it goes against your higher nature. But we are striving to be graceful in our humility, meaning if we pray for something, we are going, God, we want your stamp of approval upon it. So if it is off in some way, I give you the right to veto that prayer. And that is a beautiful place to get to internally, where you can begin to say, my prayer was answered, I praise the Lord. My prayer was not answered, I praise the Lord. For He is the giver of all good things. He knows, I don't. That is a state that, how are you going to get to that place? Many of us had difficult authority figures in our lives growing up. In some cases, the authority was too harsh, too critical, too judgmental. In other cases, the authority really was not even present. The authority acted as though they loved us. Maybe it was a parent or a guardian. But really, when it came down to it, they weren't there for us as we needed them to be. They didn't recognize when we were in emotional difficulty. They wanted us to hurry through our emotions because it was inconvenient for them. So that's not love. And now we find ourselves having to turn to the authority of God and say, I'm asking, and I would like to receive. And I'm seeking, and I would like to find. And I'm knocking, and I wish that you would open the door. And we'll have that layer of nervousness because what if God is an authority just like the authorities that raised us? And that's something that we have to work because we're in the graduate program. We can no longer allow that untruth to maintain its position there. We have to go like, what was in the past was of human origin. We are now seeking to work in the laws of prayer with the true authority of love. Well, we have to have compassion for our minds that are a little bit like protective. It's like, well, that all sounds good, but like I can't be sure that what you're saying is true. So that's why the path is not an instantaneous snap of the fingers. It's a gradual eroding of the resistance that we have to the possibility that God is a truly loving authority and that God knows more than we do and that grace is a real thing that's given to you if you decide to play by the rules. We teach that there are immutable principles. I remember when, many of the things that I've tried to learn over the years, and sometimes I would end up becoming a teacher, like I'd be a guitar teacher or some other things I don't want to talk about. People would often go, well, is this always the case? Like if you say, well, the rule is this, is that always the case? People wanted these definite rules where they can go like, just tell me. Like for example, if you want to learn Spanish. And, the rule might be, well, if it's some action that you do to yourself, you use the reflective verb, or reflexive, or whatever it's called. We don't have that in English. So it's a concept that takes a little bit of getting used to. And when people are learning it, they want to know, well, do I always do it this way? And for any of you who have studied languages, you know that there's always exceptions. And that's irritating because we just tell me that it's always this way. Now, ironically, when it comes to God, it is always this way. What is the this way? Well, that's what you have to choose to discover. These immutable laws that you can absolutely count on. Now, one of them, which we began to introduce here, is the law of assumption. And this is something that presupposes your prayers. If I was to pray that I will walk out here and next week I will be a CEO of a major software company, I mean, yes, I have asked and it shall be given, right? Well, if I energetically do not fit into that role, why would God put me there? Just because I asked for it? What about all the people who are going to be then dependent upon me as a CEO of a company in which I have no knowledge of what I should be doing? Just because I said, well, this is an immutable law, so I should get it, right? No, God is looking out for everybody. And it would really be kind of unfortunate if I did get pushed into that position and like 3 weeks later they're like, oh my God, what a disaster. That would not be good for me, the future consequences. Now, that's a bit of a gross example, but let's look at our lives and go, what are we praying for? Are we preparing ourselves to succeed when the arrival of our prayers manifests? And that's really, really important because if you don't do anything to prepare, how many people have said, well, like, I want to know God, but it's so hard and it's never going to happen for me and it's probably all weird and I don't think I'm that kind of person. So what have I said? I have made a prayer. My prayer is what we call a house divided. Part of me goes, I want God, and another part of me is praying, by declaring it, that I will not have God because I am not one of those people, or it's too hard, or it's unfair, or it's going to be weird. Don't think that you are not that you're not using the same law of prayer when you state those things. Okay, so let's say we go, I really want God in my life. I want God to be the cornerstone of how I live. But there's parts of me that go, I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if this is for me. Do I have to become some sort of weird Christian? Or maybe it's better off if I choose some sort of Eastern path. Or there's a lot of confusion there. So I have not yet done the seeking. I have not gone internally and I have not sought out, am I truly willing to prepare myself to become somebody who resides in that place of God? And let's say I do seek and I go, yes, I do believe that, and I like the Christian mystical path, and I like that place that I go to. Okay, now, does my action support what I have decided? I've decided in thought. Do the words that I speak, when I'm sitting in a conversation and people are talking about going to church and they're like, yeah, I don't go to church because it's all a bunch of hypocrites. Do I sit there and I agree with them? Or do I say something? Well, what would I say? Well, I would say the place that I go to doesn't feel hypocritical. Well, now we potentially get into an argument about it. Do I want to be the one who's now representing the church? Is that congruent with how I see myself? So maybe we have a discrepancy because we're still too attached to being honored and admired by people. We don't realize in that moment that God's going like, hey, what happened? I thought we were on this track, and now you're sitting here agreeing with somebody that all churches are hypocritical. What happened? You know, the reason that it's easier to do that is because the touch of God is much softer. But then God goes, well, I cannot fulfill your prayer because you are not really committed to it. So how can I give you something that goes against your will? That would be a violation on my part, God speaking. So now we see there's a pressure. That if I want the things that I say I want, my actions have to support that all across the board. Hence, the spiritual path creates pressure. And how can it not be? There's no way around that piece. Now, this beautiful law of assumption is there to help you. Because the law of assumption states that that which I assume is that which I become. And we're all immersed in it. If you had bad experiences growing up, which most of us, because I've heard pretty much all your stories through retrospection, that you did not receive the love that you needed at the time that you needed it, and you were transported because your family moved, or because your friends abandoned you at key moments, or because your parents started to dispute and therefore they forgot about you. So we form conclusions based on that, because we live in this very small little contained universe that's me and my siblings and my parents, and then my outer family and my schooling. And that's a very narrow perspective of the universe. But when you're 9 years old, what are you going to do? How else are you going to figure it out? So you determine, well, this must be how life is. So we make conclusions, and then we go out into the adult world as of 18, and we go, this is how the world is. It's unsafe here, people are going to abandon you when you need them the most, people say one thing but they don't actually mean it, etc., etc. You got a lot of concepts sitting in the way. And that is not the truth, but you have assumed it is, and what do you create? You create that which you assume. You do that also with the positive things. You know, you find a job, hopefully that job is fulfilling. You find a partner, you work on the relationship. But of course, within the relationship, you're going to also assume certain things based on the other relationships you've had, beginning with the relationships with your folks. Is this how women are always going to be, just like my mom? Is this how men are going to be, just like my dad? So whatever you've assumed has populated that which you have become. And this is all pointing to the one teaching, which is we are created in the image of God, which does not mean we look like God or God looks like us. It means that we have the same creative power that God has. But we have to learn how to use it. So we have to figure out, what do I want to be? And then can I sit there in meditation and can I assume it? Now, of course, there will be a resistance, because part of us will go, well, you're just in some sort of crazy rant. There's no way I can be that, or there's no way I could think that way. Where does that resistance come from? It comes from within you. So to a certain degree, you have not yet assumed the lack of resistance that is necessary. Once again, pointing to the fact that this is a graduate program. You're not just going to sit there, most of you are not going to be able to sit there and in one meditation assume something, and all your resistance fades away, and you walk into the world and it's actually true. Think about when you get your first job out of college. You know, you've done all this training and you've been prepared for your work life, and they hire you because they see some potential. Do you walk in and instantly become the fulfilled version of what they have hired? Most of us don't. We have to sort of get a feel for it. We have to see that we can do it. We have to see how we interact with people. But eventually, that newness fades away and you realize that you can do the job. The employer assumed you could. You probably had to assume you could in order to project well in the interview. And now you've settled in, and in fact, you perform well. So there's many ways that you can watch this law of assumption in effect. It's really integrated into how we live. It's just that you don't learn about it in this way. We try to empower you here to go, you are the creator of your life in harmony with God. God has given us the rules, the laws, the tools. Will you implement them? Can you handle the pressure? When you sit there and go, I've been hooked on this person that broke up with me 13 years ago and I can't seem to shake it from me. It still gets in the way. Can I sit there and assume that I am totally finished with that, totally forgiven of the person, totally accepting of them having moved on, totally free to attract somebody new into my life? Can I assume that? Yes, you can assume it. Will you? Well, I don't know how much work you're willing to do. But it's an immutable law that if you do it, one day you will wake up and it will be true. You will no longer be tied to that past. So, once again, God does not force these things upon you. I want you to become inspired that these rules and these programs exist. And all you have to do is opt in, really. and try. And, sweat out the pressure when it's difficult. Just go like, I'm right in there. I'm right in there and playing by God's rules. And I'm really trusting. I really have a good faith that this is going to work out for me.